Welcome back to Reformed Thinking. I'm really glad you're here with us. Today we're going to take a look at a word that's been tossed around so much in English that it's almost lost its shape.
Mm.
You hear it, you think you know what it means, and it's a word that sits right at the center of the Christian life, yet I would argue it's one of the ones we misunderstand the most.
And that word is charity.
That's the one.
Yeah, it's a word that has suffered a great deal of semantic drift over the centuries. I mean, if you were to stop someone on the street today and ask them to define charity, they'd almost certainly describe a very specific set of actions.
Right. They talk about giving money.
They talk about dropping coins in a beggar's cup, or writing a check to a nonprofit, or maybe, cleaning out their attic and taking a box of old coats to a donation center.
And that's exactly the image I get. It's philanthropy. It's the act of giving material goods to the poor. But we're continuing our deep dive into C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, specifically his chapter on charity.
And he's going to push back on that modern definition.
They're hard. He is. We find that our modern definition isn't just incomplete, it's a drastic shrinking of what the concept actually holds. Lewis is going to argue that we've taken something massive, something foundational, and reduced it to something very, very small.
It's a reduction, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Lewis, he just cuts right to the chase. He defines charity as love in the Christian sense.
Okay.
And this isn't a side topic. We spent time in previous discussions looking at the cardinal virtues.
Prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude.
Right. Those are virtues that most civilized people, Christian or not, would recognize as good things. But now, Lewis is moving us into the three theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. These are the distinct marks of the Christian walk. They're the fruit of the Spirit working in a believer.
So before we get into the weeds, I want to set the mission for this deep dive. I think we need to strip away the sentimentality.
Oh, for sure.
Because in the modern church, and certainly in the culture at large, love has become a very soft word. It's associated with being nice, being affirmative, and, generally just having warm feelings toward everyone.
We often confuse love with niceness. But the historical Christian view, the Reformed view, and definitely the view Lewis presents here, is, well, it's quite different. Charity isn't a feeling. It's a harsh, practical, and potent state of the will.
It's not about how you feel.
Not at all. It's about what you do and the intent behind it.
Okay, so let's start with that linguistic shift Lewis mentions. He points out that charity used to have this much wider meaning, but now it's used almost exclusively to mean alms, giving to the poor. Why does he think that happened?
Well, he uses this brilliant analogy to explain the slip in meaning. He compares it to poetry.
Okay.
Imagine you ask a child or, maybe someone who doesn't read a lot of literature, what makes a poem a poem? What's the defining characteristic?
Oh, they'd almost certainly say rhyme. If it rhymes, it's a poem. If it doesn't, it's just talking.
Exactly. Rhyme is the most obvious part. It's the external feature that catches the ear. It's the thing that signals this is poetry to the untrained observer. But anyone who studies literature knows that rhyme is not the essence of poetry. I mean, you can have magnificent poetry, like Milton's Paradise Lost. That doesn't rhyme at all. And you can have a little limerick on a bathroom wall that rhymes perfectly, but it's certainly not poetry.
So in this analogy, giving to the poor is the rhyme.
Precisely. Giving alms is the most obvious, external, visible manifestation of charity. It's the part you can see. So over time, the popular mind just took the part for the whole. We confuse the symptom with the condition.
The fruit with the root.
That's it. We confuse the fruit with the root. Giving to the poor is a result of charity, but it's not the definition of it. You can give all your money to the poor, as St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians, and yet have not charity. You can have the rhyme without the poem.
That's a really helpful distinction. So if giving money is just the rhyme, what is the poem? How does Lewis define the core reality of charity?
He defines it simply as love in the Christian sense.
Mm-hmm.
But then, of course, we run into another problem immediately.
The word love.
The word love, which is even more slippery than charity. We use the word love to describe our relationship with our spouse, our children, God, and tacos. We need to be specific.
And this is where we have to do some heavy lifting. Lewis makes a distinction that I think is totally counterintuitive to how we're raised. I mean, we're raised on a diet of follow your heart and trust your feelings. But Lewis says Christian love is not an emotion, it is a state of the will.
And that is the pivot point for the entire chapter. Christian love, or agape if you want the Greek term, is a state of the will. It's a choice. And this is vital to understand because of the commandment we're given. We are commanded to love your neighbor as yourself.
And you cannot command a feeling.
You absolutely cannot. If I put gun to your head and ordered you to feel happy or to feel sad or to feel fond of a specific person right this second, you couldn't do it. You might be able to act it out, but you can't force the internal chemistry of your emotions to change on command. But God commands us to love. Therefore, this love cannot be an emotion. It must be something within the control of our will.
Lewis uses that phrase, love your neighbor as yourself, to explain what this looks like. And he points out something that I found quite funny and very relatable.
Yeah.
He says that we don't always like ourselves.
It's a fantastic reality check, isn't it? We tend to think that loving myself means sitting around admiring my own virtues. But that's not true self-love. That's just narcissism.
Yeah.
Think about your own experience. There are days when you look in the mirror and you're just disgusted. You might have said something foolish in a meeting. You might have committed a sin you're ashamed of. You might just look tired and out of shape. In that moment, you have no affection for yourself. You might even feel a strong dislike.
Oh, I've definitely had those mornings. I look in the mirror and just think you are a mess.
And yet, even in that moment of dislike, do you stop wanting your own good? Do you stop wanting to be fed? Do you stop wanting to be warm? Or for the police to protect you?
Even if I'm angry at myself, I still want lunch.
That is the point. That relentless, biological, deep-seated desire for your own well-being. That is the love Lewis is talking about. It's a state of the will that is always operating. We naturally desire our own good. We want ourselves to succeed. We want ourselves to be safe. We want ourselves to be happy.
So the command to love my neighbor as myself means I have to extend that same relentless will for well-being to them.
Yes. It has nothing to do with thinking they're nice. It has nothing to do with finding them attractive or interesting. It simply means that you decide, with your will, to wish for their good just as you wish for your own. Lewis even points out that loving yourself doesn't mean you pretend you are good when you're not. So loving your enemy doesn't mean you pretend he's not an enemy.
I can still see the truth.
You can look at a man and say, he is a scoundrel, and still wish for his ultimate good, for his repentance and salvation.
This brings us to a distinction Lewis makes between charity, this act of the will, and affection. Because we do like some people. I like my friends. I like my family. That feeling comes naturally. I don't have to force my will to want them to be happy.
And Lewis is very careful here. He doesn't want to dismiss natural affection at all. He distinguishes between charity as a virtue and affection as a natural phenomenon. He compares it to having a particular taste in food.
Oh, okay.
Some people like spicy food. Others prefer mild. Some people are naturally warm and affectionate. Others are naturally cold or reserved.
And because it's natural, it's not spiritual.
It's morally neutral in itself.
Yeah.
Being fond of someone is not a virtue. It doesn't make you holy. Jesus himself said that even the tax collectors love those who love them. It's easy to be kind to people you like.
Of course.
That's just nature taking its course. It's no more Christian than having a good digestion is Christian.
However, Lewis does argue that we should use it. He says it makes charity easier.
It does. It removes the friction. If you have a natural affection for someone, your will and your emotions are pulling in the same direction. You want them to be happy because you like them. It's easier to exercise the will for their good when your feelings are already on board.
That makes sense.
And that's why Lewis says we have a duty to encourage our affections. We should try to like people. We should try to find their good points. We should try to cultivate a taste for people, just like you might try to cultivate a taste for healthy food you don't initially like.
But, and here's where this deep dive gets really interesting, he also warns that natural affection can be a trap. We usually think of loving our friends and family as the highest good. We see it in movies all the time.
Right.
But Lewis says if we aren't careful, that natural love can become uncharitable.
And this reflects the Reformed understanding of the fall perfectly. Sin affects every part of us, even our good parts. Our natural loves, if left to themselves, can become idols. They can become destructive. Lewis points out that if you have a strong natural affection for your tribe, your friends, your family, you can become unfair to outsiders.
You become clannish.
Exactly. You might pervert justice to protect someone you like. You might overlook a serious flaw in your child because your affection blinds you.
The example he uses, that just, it's so powerful. The doting mother. This is such a strong image because we usually hold up the mother-child bond as the purest form of human love.
Lewis just flips that assumption on its head. He describes a mother who is so driven by her natural affection, her intense emotional attachment, that she actually harms the child. She spoils him.
But why? I mean, in her mind, she's loving him.
Is she? Or is she prioritizing her own emotional gratification? She wants the child to smile at her right now. She wants the warm feeling of being the benevolent provider. She can't bear to discipline the child or to deny the child anything because it would make her feel bad in the moment.
Oh.
She's sacrificing the child's long-term character and future happiness for her own immediate emotional comfort.
That's a heavy indictment. She's calling it love, but it's actually selfishness.
It is affection masquerading as charity. True charity, the will seeking the ultimate good of the other, would say, I love you enough to say no. I love you enough to let you cry now so that you will be a better man later. That requires the will to override the natural impulse of affection.
So the doting mother is just feeding her own need to be liked by her child.
That's what Lewis is arguing. It's a sobering thought.
That distinction really forces you to check your motives, doesn't it? Am I doing this because it's good for them or because it makes me feel good?
That is the constant question of the Christian life.
Now let's talk about the people who struggle with this the most, the people who aren't naturally affectionate. Lewis calls this the cold temperament.
And there are many, many people who worry about this. They look at other Christians who are bubbly and warm and hugging everyone, and they feel like they're defective. They think, I must not be a real Christian because I don't feel that warmth.
I'm sure some of our listeners feel that way.
And Lewis offers a great deal of comfort here. He says that having a cold temperament is a misfortune, like having a bad leg or a poor eyesight. It is not a sin. It's just the raw material you were given.
It's the hand they were dealt.
Correct. But, and this is absolutely crucial, it does not excuse them from the duty of charity. God doesn't judge you for having a cold temperament, but he does judge you for what you do with it.
So how does a cold person, or really any of us dealing with a person we dislike, practice charity? If the feeling isn't there, what do we do?
The rule is simple and stunningly practical. Lewis says, act as if you did.
It sounds a bit like fake it till you make it.
In a way, but without the deception. You're not trying to trick the other person into thinking you like them. You're obeying a command from God. You just ask yourself, if I did love this person, what would I do?
Okay.
Would I speak kindly to them? Would I help them with their work? Would I refrain from gossiping about them? Once you know the answer, you go and do it.
And this leads to what Lewis calls the great secret. It's a kind of psychological feedback loop that the church has known about for 2,000 years.
Yes. It's profound. When you behave as if you love someone, you will eventually come to love them. The action of the will impacts the emotions. It's not the other way around. If you force yourself, by an act of will, to be kind to someone you dislike, over time, you will find your dislike lessening.
You'll actually start to like them.
You might. Or at the very least, the hatred will cool. You might start to see them differently. You might start to notice their humanity. The act of the will drags the feelings along behind it, kicking and screaming sometimes, but it drags them.
But there's a very specific warning here, a massive caveat. You can't just go through the motions and expect the magic to happen if your motive is wrong.
Right. This is critical.
Yeah.
Lewis warns against doing a good deed just to show off. If you're being kind to a difficult person so that you can pat yourself on the back and say, look what a fine, forgiving, charitable person I am.
Then you're acting out of pride. It becomes a performance.
And it's a performance that fails. Lewis notes that people are not stupid. They can spot patronage a mile away. They can spot condescension. If you help someone just to feel superior to them, they won't be grateful. They'll be resentful.
And when they're not grateful?
You'll be offended. You'll think, after all I did for them, and you'll end up disliking them even more than when you started. The whole thing backfires.
So what is the correct motive? If I don't like them, and I'm not doing it for thanks, why am I doing it?
You must do it because they are a self made by God. They are a soul created in the image of God, desiring their own happiness just as you desire yours. You're recognizing the objective reality of who they are in God's eyes. You're doing it for God's sake and for the sake of the truth.
Not for my own sake.
Not for your own sake. When you act from that motive, ignoring the applause, ignoring the gratitude, then the spiritual law works. The ice begins to crack.
This brings us to the inverse of this law. And honestly, reading this part again, it's frightening. Because if doing good produces love, what does doing evil produce?
It produces hatred. Lewis calls this the compound interest of good and evil. The spiritual law works in both directions. If you injure someone you dislike, you will find yourself disliking them more.
It creates a spiral.
A vicious downward spiral. And Lewis uses a stark historical example here, writing in the shadow of World War II. He talks about the Germans and the Jews. He suggests that perhaps at the very beginning, a particular German ill-treated a Jew because he hated him. That was the initial spark.
Okay.
But afterwards, He hated him much more because he had ill-treated him.
That makes a chilling amount of psychological sense. When you hurt someone, you have to justify it to yourself.
You have to. You can't live with the idea that you are the villain. So if you hurt someone, you have to convince yourself that they deserved it. You have to dehumanize them. You have to say they are vermin or they are the enemy. And once you've dehumanized them to justify the first injury, it becomes so much easier to inflict the second injury, which in turn makes you hate them more.
Cruelty fuels hate, and hate fuels cruelty.
It's a feedback loop from hell.
Lewis uses the term compound interest. We usually think of that in finance, money growing over time. But he applies it to character.
He says good and evil both increase at compound interest. And that is why the small decisions we make every day are so incredibly critical. We tend to dismiss our small sins. We say, oh, I'll just indulge in this one little angry outburst, or I'll just ignore this one chance to be kind. But Lewis argues we're altering the trajectory of our souls with every choice.
He uses a military analogy here that I think is very effective. He talks about strategic points.
He does. He says a small good act today, a moment of biting your tongue when you want to lash out, a small kindness to a stranger. It's like the capture of a strategic point on a battlefield.
A hill or a railway junction.
Exactly. It might not look like much on the map. It doesn't feel like a huge victory. But from that point, you can launch victories you never dreamed of a few months later. It gives you a position of strength for the next battle.
And the reverse is true.
The reverse is terrifyingly true. A trivial indulgence in lust or anger is the loss of a bridgehead. You've given the enemy, and here, speaking from our theological framework, we mean the devil, the world, and the flesh, a foothold. You've lost a ridge, and from that ridge, the enemy can launch an attack that would have been impossible before.
From a Reformed perspective, this really highlights the danger of our fallen state, doesn't it? We can't just coast. There's no neutral.
It highlights the doctrine of sanctification. We are not static beings. We are always moving. We're either being sanctified, growing in grace, extending our capacity for charity, or we are degenerating. We're either becoming a creature of heaven or a creature of hell, one small choice at a time.
There's no neutral ground.
You're either advancing or retreating in every single moment.
Wow. That raises the stakes of a Tuesday afternoon significantly. It's not just about being nice. It's about the very construction of the soul.
It is. You are building the house you will inhabit for eternity, brick by brick.
I want to pivot now to the final section of this chapter, because Lewis takes this definition of charity, this hard, practical state of the will, and applies it to the most important relationship of all, our relationship with God.
This is the vertical application.
Yeah.
And it addresses a problem that plagues so many sincere Christians. I hear all the time in pastoral counseling, people will say, I know I'm supposed to love God, but I look inside my heart and I don't feel it.
Or they don't feel it enough.
Right. I don't feel the same emotional intensity for God that I feel for my spouse or my children. Am I a hypocrite?
And I think most of us have been there. You're in a church service, people around you seem to be having a very emotional experience, and you're standing there feeling nothing. You start to panic. You think, do I even know God? Am I a fraud?
And Lewis says the answer is the same as it is for your neighbor. Act as if you did.
Just do it.
Just do it. Don't sit around checking your own spiritual pulse to see if you feel devout. You can't manufacture those feelings. Instead, ask yourself the practical question. If I were sure that I loved God, what would I do?
And the answer is usually very practical. I'd obey him. I would pray, even when I don't feel like it. I would read my Bible. I'd treat my neighbor with respect.
Spot on. When you find the answer, go and do it. That is love. Jesus himself says in John 14:15, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. He doesn't say if you love me, you will feel a warm glow. Love is obedience. It's the alignment of the will with God's will.
This is actually incredibly freeing. It takes the pressure off of the emotional performance.
It is theologically robust comfort. God knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. He knows our emotions are tied to our biology, to our hormones, to whether we got enough sleep. If you're sick or tired or clinically depressed, you probably will not feel ecstatic love for God.
And that's okay.
God doesn't judge us based on the weather of our emotions. He looks at the compass of our will. Are you pointing toward him even when the fog is thick? That is what matters.
But Lewis does say that feelings have a place. He isn't saying we should be cold, unfeeling robots.
Not at all. He says that feelings are a gift. God gives us feelings of love if he pleases. They are the dessert, not the main course. We can't demand them, and we certainly can't create them by our own effort. But often as we walk in, obedience acting as if we loved him, the feelings do come as a gift.
But we should never rely on them.
Never. If you build your faith on your feelings, you'll be unstable your entire Christian life. Feelings come and go like the wind. If you build your faith on the will to obey, you're building on the rock.
There's a beautiful point Lewis makes near the end about the difference between our love for God and God's love for us.
Yes. He says God's love for us is a much safer subject to think about than our love for him.
And why is that?
Because our love is fickle. It's weak. It's interrupted by our selfishness constantly. It sputters and fails. But his love, Lewis uses a very powerful word. He says it is relentless.
Relentless. That's a word that implies both comfort and, well, a bit of terror.
It does. And it should. Lewis says God's love is not wearied by our sins or our indifference. We can't drive him away by being unlovable. In fact, because he loves us, he is determined to cure us. He will not stop until the job is done.
It connects back to what we said at the start. Charity isn't soft. It isn't just nice.
Not at all. God's love is a consuming fire. We tend to think love means a kind of mushy acceptance. I love you just the way you are. But Lewis argues that God loves you far too much to leave you the way you are. He wants to perfect you. He wants to remove the stain of sin. It's a love that says, I'm going to make you holy, whatever the cost to you or to me.
That is the Reformed view of grace right there. It's irresistible and it's effectual. It actually does the work.
It's the strongest force in the universe.
Yeah.
It's the force that drove Christ to the cross. That wasn't a sentimental moment. That was the supreme act of the will for the good of the beloved.
So as we wrap this up, let's summarize the distinction Lewis makes between the worldly man and the Christian. Because on the surface, sometimes they might look similar.
They might. The worldly man has affections. He has likings. He treats certain people kindly because he likes them. He's nice to his friends and cold, or at least indifferent to his enemies. His kindness depends entirely on his mood and his natural temperament. He's a slave to his own chemistry.
Christian.
The Christian is operating on charity on the will. He tries to treat everyone kindly, regardless of his feelings. He treats the boor, the enemy, and the stranger with the same will for their good that he has for himself and his own family. And the paradox is that by doing so, he finds himself liking more and more people as he goes on.
So he ends up with more real affection.
He ends up with more true affection than the worldly man, even though he might have started with cold obedience.
It's the result of the work.
It is. The worldly man only loves what is already lovable. The Christian, by God's grace, learns to love the unlovable, and in doing so, helps make it lovable.
It really changes how you view your daily interactions. It stops being about just getting through the day and starts being about training the heart, training the will.
It's spiritual boot camp. Every single interaction is a rep.
I want to leave our listeners with a thought that Lewis hints at, which I think is a significant challenge. We talked about how every choice is a military maneuver, a capture of a strategic point, or a loss of ground.
The compound interest.
Right. So if our current likes and dislikes, the person we are right now, are simply the result of the thousands of small choices we've made in the past, then the person you will be 10 years from now is being constructed by the choice you make immediately after this deep dive ends.
That is the reality. You are building a creature. And the question is it a creature that can endure the presence of God? Or is it a creature that will be consumed by its own self-centeredness?
That is the question. The next time you have a chance to be kind to someone you find annoying, remember, you aren't just being polite. You are engaging in an active war against your own selfishness, and you are building a capacity for love that will last forever.
Amen to that.
This has been Reformed Thinking. Thanks for listening.